So you know what peptides are and you want to start your research, but you don't know where to start. By the end of this video, you will be able to design a starter stack. Stick around. Hey guys, how's it going? Dr. Rob here, 25-year clinical practice member, American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, and future champion bodybuilder as soon as they come out with a torso-only division. Damn calves. Anyway, so hopefully you watched either my first video about what is a peptide, or you figured it out on your own, or some other content, and now you want to design a starter stack, but you just don't know where to start. You went to biosimpeptides.com and you scrolled down and you saw 35 different things in the shop and you have no idea how you would design a starter stack. So I'm going to try to give you as concise the information as possible, because I've watched a lot of content about this and I feel like it's either delivered with way too much technical information that just goes over the head of most people, or it's not given in a practical application to where somebody could actually say, okay, now that I know this, I can do this. So I'm going to try to do that for you. I'm not doing this out of like the benevolence of my heart. I have this conversation with people almost every day of my life. So I'm doing this out of the selfish need to save that 60 to 90 to 120 minutes that is getting used up every day, having the exact same conversation with so many people, which, I don't mind giving the information, but it is literally the identical conversation. It's mostly one-sided, like this will be, and it's just me kind of giving them information. So the only difference is when I'm talking to those people, I am staring at that person, so I kind of have an idea of their individual needs, because a starter stack is going to vary depending on if you are a 25-year-old fit person, or a 30-year-old unhealthy person, or a 50-year-old fit person, or a 50-year-old unhealthy person. So I will try to fit that into this talk right here. I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. I don't care about YouTube's algorithm and 10 minutes being ideal. This is probably going to take, half an hour, but I'm going to talk as fast as I can and not skip over anything, and also not give any unnecessary information. So first, let's talk about sources, right? You need peptides to take peptides. So where do you get them? So there's basically two ways to get them right now. You can either go to a clinic and get them from a doctor. They will only be able to prescribe you what is currently FDA approved. Then you will go to a compounding pharmacy and you will get those few things that are FDA approved, and you will pay compounding pharmacy fees. So that obviously has flaws that I tried to sort of, fit in there. The other way to get them is by getting them from what's called a research compound company, like Peptides. The benefit of this is that you can get basically every possible compound that you would want. The only drawback is that they are not intended for human use. You'll just have to do your own research there. But what I can tell you is that, as a member of A4M, we have looked at a lot of different compounds from a lot of different companies. And basically, most research compound companies are just reselling like wholesale Chinese peptides. That is true. Now, I will tell you that most of the API of all peptides is from China, but they are synthesized in different places. And obviously, the synthesis protocol is what matters more than the raw materials. Of course, the raw materials matter, but when they're synthesized, that's when you are going to test and determine purity and dosage. So what we found about research compounds is that about 46% of them are either substandard purity, or the dosage is radically different from what is published on the vial. Or if they do test of proper purity and dosage, then they don't test consistently from batch to batch. So those are all obviously problems. About half of them do test okay. So flip a coin with your life if you like. So what I can tell you, shameless plug, is that, Peptides, I am very OCD about the purity. So I feel very confident that anybody doing their research with those is not going to have any issues because I know exactly what's going into them. So now let's talk to those sort of 4 groups that I was referring to before. Why do we want to take peptides? In the first video, I kind of talked about systemic inflammation being a major problem, insulin resistance being a major problem, and mitochondrial dysfunction being a major problem. What you care about is body composition. You want bigger muscles, you want to lose fat, you want your brain to work better, you want to feel better, you want to sleep better, you want to be less, achy, all of those things. They're all tied together, okay? Obviously, the most popular peptide group of the last few years has been what are called the GLPs. And the most famous one is Ozempic. Ozempic's been around for a very long time as a diabetes medication, and then as off-label use, which most, compounds in the US are used off-label. But as off-label use, it's now used for weight loss. The primary method by which it works is what's called a GLP-1. And I'm only telling you that, like I said, I'm not going to try to be like too nerdy and technical on this, but I'm just differentiating it from the other 2 groups. So what it basically does is it tells the part of your brain that gets hungry to not get hungry, basically. And therefore, you starve yourself. And obviously, when you're in that big of a calorie deficit, you are going to lose weight. The problem is, because you are starving yourself, the weight you're losing is, if I'm being generous, it's 2/3 lean tissue and 1/3 fat. Unfortunately, it's actually even worse than a ratio than that, but that's a very unfavorable ratio because that means you are not getting leaner, you are getting smaller, and you are becoming metabolically less healthy. And it also has some side effects that I would call complications because they are irreversible, such as gastroparesis, which means calcified stomach or stone stomach, which is an irreversible condition that will affect your digestion for the rest of your life. So to me, Ozempic should be retired as a weight loss drug. It is used actually now for, rehabilitation of addicts because those neurons in the brain that control your appetite also control other impulses like alcoholism and porn and gambling and different things. So it is actually used to help addicts recover. And that's where it should stay. The other drug that everybody knows about is tirzepatide. This is currently FDA approved. Tirzepatide has the strongest appetite suppression of the GLPs. It also has what's called GIP agonism. What that means is that it not only tells you to stop eating, but it also does help your insulin levels. Now, the problem with that is, again, it's too strong of an appetite suppressant. You don't need enough protein. You shrink versus getting leaner. It is the best thing we have FDA approved right now. But the newest compound, which is currently in testing, is called retatrutide. This is a GLP-3. And what I love about these content creators is they come out and they go, yeah, so retatrutide, it's a GLP-3. It's a GLP, GIP, and glucagon agonist. And you're supposed to hear that and understand what they said. It's like, I think they're so used to either watching content or talking to colleagues. Like, I actually practice medicine full time. So I spend every day, diagnosing people, and I have to explain that diagnosis in a way they understand. And I have to explain their treatment or the solution in a way they can understand. So I feel like I have a pretty good sense for, when I'm getting like too nerdy and too technical and just, simply using terminology that people aren't going to understand. And it's like when you're reading a book and you get to the bottom of the page and you kind of have no idea what you just read. It's usually because somewhere on that page you ran into a word or phrase that you didn't understand. Your brain just went off the tracks. So that can happen, in conversation also. That third thing, the glucagon, is vitally important. What is glucagon? Very simply, it's the opposite of insulin. So insulin is the storage hormone. Glucagon is the energy releasing hormone. And by agonizing glucagon, what retatrutide does is it forces your liver to turn fat into energy. And it also helps metabolize your carbohydrates that you're consuming. So what you'll notice on retatrutide is that you will not only get leaner, but it will increase your metabolic rate. You will not lose muscle while you're on it, and it is the only GLP that is actually slightly anabolic. And to save time, I won't explain that pathway, but just know that. So that's why you get a lot of bodybuilders and fitness models and people that are already lean taking it, because it not only helps them get leaner, but it makes you more sensitive to insulin. And remember what I said in the beginning, insulin resistance is a huge problem. It is the source of 90% of all disease, and including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and things that you don't think would have anything to do with sugar and insulin. But those are basically diabetes of the brain. So, I take it to stay insulin sensitive. When I started taking retatrutide, I was 11% body fat, and now I'm 10. So it's not like I got significantly leaner. I didn't need to get significantly leaner. But I just take it because it is an amazing longevity drug. If you look at what it's doing to organ systems, it literally eradicates fatty liver disease, kidneys function better, heart functions better, brain functions better. It is a longevity medication that, oh, by the way, you happen to lose fat. So when it comes out, I hope everybody who has access to it takes it, because it is going to change the face of disease and healthcare and hospitalization and aging. You will literally see graphs from 2027 change direction, for the next however many decades. So I'm pretty excited about that, because I want people to be healthier. So retatrutide. So how do you take it? Well, I would recommend that you start at, if someone were to take it hypothetically, I would recommend that you start at 0.5 milligrams and then you step up 0.5 milligrams per week. Why? There are no real complications with retatrutide. The side effects would be like nausea, constipation, gastric upset. I had a little bit of what's called dysesthesia, where your skin gets kind of like cold and tingly and crawly and weird, kind of like when you wear one of those weird fuzzy sweaters, but it went away. All that stuff goes away, but you can reduce the chances of that just by stepping up slowly. People that are in a rush, can you start at 1 and go to 2, then go to 3? Sure, but you're just like increasing your risk of those side effects. And like I said, none of them are really that terrible, but you just want to try to avoid them if you can, because it does also slow, your digestive system. So you will move your bowels less often. So that's where the constipation comes in. So 0.5, then 1, then 1.5, then 2, then 2.5. Up to the magic dose seems to be 4. Unless you're a really poor responder, I would say once you get to 4, stay at 4 and just be patient. So that's retatrutide, insulin resistance. There are other things that increase insulin sensitivity, but retatrutide would be the choice from the GLP family. Now let's talk about growth hormone. Growth hormone is like this master hormone that, I hate the word growth because everybody thinks that this is a hormone that causes growth, and it does at the right age and the right setting and circumstances, but that's not the only thing it does. It controls your metabolism, your sleep, your hair, your skin, your brain function. It's kind of like the one compound or the one hormone that you would associate most with aging. And like everything else, it peaks when you're 18 to 20 and then it dips over time. So if you are below, I'd say around 45-ish as a general rule, you can take a class of compounds called growth hormone releasing hormones and growth hormone releasing peptides, and these will induce your pituitary gland, little peanut-shaped gland in your head that makes growth hormone. It'll induce your pituitary to make more growth hormone. The two hormones, the two most common ones are Ipamorelin and CJC, 1295. These are the two most common ones. They're the two best ones. And then the most common growth hormone releasing peptide is Ipamorelin. So you would take Ipamorelin with Ipamorelin or CJC with Ipamorelin. You will see CJC and Ipamorelin blended together because it just makes the whole process easier. You reconstitute it once, you're going to inject them together anyway. So you will see that blended together. You'll see that on biohacking.com. Or you could do Ipamorelin and Ipamorelin. Ipamorelin is just a different compound. It's a little more expensive. Supposedly it targets visceral fat a little better. So if I was talking to somebody who was already relatively fit, I would probably recommend CJC and Ipamorelin. If I was talking to somebody who was more overweight or obese, I would maybe recommend Tessamorelin with Ipamorelin because it's going to target visceral fat a little better than CJC. So that's where that differentiator comes in. Now, if you are above 45, your pituitary is not going to respond very well to these compounds. So I would recommend going straight to growth hormone. Now, people get scared of taking growth hormone. They think that like it's going to cause cancer and it's going to make you grow in a weird ways. And what you have to understand is that you have growth hormone receptors throughout your body that are used to getting stimulated by a certain dose of growth hormone that has been slowly dwindling. So when you are treating yourself with peptide therapy, you need to think about, okay, what is my body used to? What effect am I trying to get to, right? So there's a certain marker called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. And this is the kind of end product of growth hormone. And IGF-1 is kind of like the magic thing that makes you lose fat and your metabolism speed up. So when we check IGF-1 levels of an 18 to 20-year-old, when you're 45, 50, wouldn't you like to have the IGF-1 levels that you had when you were 20 to 25? That's all we are talking about. Now, if you are a bodybuilder or you're a professional athlete who wants to cheat, then you would take growth hormone levels that are excessive and you would get IGF-1 levels that are excessive. Then you will start seeing weird things happening like growth gut that bodybuilders have where their intestines actually grow because they're taking way too much growth hormone, or like infamously Barry Bonds, who in his 30s, he packed on 50 pounds of muscle and his hat size, his baseball hat size actually grew a half an inch because growth hormone will make your like cartilage grow if you take way too much. But if you stay at 2 to 3 IUs a day, 2 to 3 international units a day, that will get your IGF-1 levels somewhere between 200 and 300, which is where you want them to be. And the way you would take growth hormone is you take it at night, right before you go to sleep. Why? Because your natural growth hormone pulse is about an hour after you fall asleep. So this is also when you would take, if you were younger, you're going to take your Tessa, CJC, and IPA right before you go to sleep. If you're older, you're going to take your growth hormone right before you go to sleep. Like I said, 2 units is like a normal anti-aging dose that will get your IGF-1 levels where you want it to be. 3 units, if you're like me and you're a psycho and you work out 2 hours every day and you're, trying to pack on a little bit of muscle and you need more recovery because you're beating your body up like crazy. So, and you would take that before you go to sleep 5 nights a week for both of them. Why? Because you're just confusing your pituitary. Remember, your body is always searching for homeostasis. There's always a pendulum effect. There's always a back and forth effect. So, there are certain things that you could stay on all the time because they don't have that. But when you are talking about certain glands, you just want to give them a break, and you need growth hormone all the time. So your pituitary is going to click right back on as soon as you take that 2 days off. So that's a pretty standard protocol for growth hormone. Now, let's talk about mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, if you are healthy and you are, you're not metabolically sick, you're not too overweight, your mitochondria probably need to be, fine-tuned, but they're probably not dysfunctional. If you are unhealthy and you are low energy and you're always tired, you have dysfunctional mitochondria. So you need to fix the mitochondria before you enhance the mitochondria. How do you fix the mitochondria? You fix them with SS31 and 5-amino-1-MQ, okay? SS31 basically will reconstruct the membrane of the mitochondria. It does some other things also, but like I said, I'm trying to keep this short. I'm going to do a mitochondrial video in the future, but SS31 basically increases the membrane. Why is that important? Because as you get older and as you become more dysfunctional, your mitochondria become leaky and they leak electrons back and forth, and that disrupts the charge potential across the membrane, which is the biggest indicator of how mitochondria function, is their millivoltage potential across the membrane. See, that's nerdy. So let's dial it back. So basically, SS31 is one of the rebuilders of mitochondria. 5-amino-1-MQ, what that does is there's a very nasty thing called NNMT. And in people that are unhealthy, they have higher levels of NNMT. What does NNMT do? Well, NAD, which you might have heard of if you're at all slightly paying attention to anti-aging or performance or just supplementation. NAD is a coenzyme. It's not a peptide, but it's a coenzyme that basically lives on your cell membrane surface, and it is primarily the gatekeeper that transfers the materials that your energy is made from. So like everything else, right? Broken record. As you get older, you get less NAD. As you get less NAD, you make energy less efficiently. So why not just take NAD? Because the problem is, if you are unhealthy and your NNMT levels are high, the NNMT is robbing your body of NAD and turning it into something called reactive oxygen species, which are these harmful radicals that increase inflammation and increase the state of oxidation. Oxidation is not a good thing when it's in an ROS. So if you were to add NAD into that environment, you are actually going to make yourself worse. So 5-amino-1-MQ suppresses NNMT. So you start with 5-amino-1-MQ. It'll suppress NNMT. Your body will naturally produce more NAD. It'll naturally produce less reactive oxygen species. Your inflammation will go down and your amount of NAD will go up. Then you can introduce NAD. Okay. Now, for the people who are not metabolically unhealthy, you can go straight into NAD and something called MOTS-C, M-O-T-S-C. That is a mitochondrial performance peptide. There is another one also called SLU-PP332, or SLOOP for short. So if somebody came to me and they're like, hey, I work out 5 days a week, I'm pretty fit, but I'm just seeing if I can get an edge. SLOOP is a insanely good performance enhancer for mitochondria. MOTS has an anabolic effect and a fat loss effect, but if an unhealthy person takes MOTS, they are actually going to get more tired while all their friends are telling them how MOTS gives them all this energy because their mitochondria haven't been fixed yet. So unhealthy people, SS31, 5-amino-1-MQ. Then you follow it with what the healthy people take, SLOOP, MOTS, and NAD. Okay? Now, you're sitting here thinking, okay, I've never heard of 5-amino. I've never heard of SLOOP. All anybody talks about is BPC 157 and TB500, the Wolverines. I hear about these every day. So, and remember, what did I say in the very beginning? Systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, and mitochondrial dysfunction. So, talking about systemic inflammation, because they're all kind of related, by the way, but if you want to attack systemic inflammation directly, like for example, I take BPC 157, TB500, and KPV on a regular basis at very, very small doses because I'm not treating any injuries right now, thank God. But the good thing about those is they have such wide safety windows that when somebody has like an acute muscle tear, we actually give them 50 milligrams of BPC and TB500. If you look on Biosyn Peptides, you'll see that an entire vial of BPC is only 10 milligrams. So I'm talking about giving them 5 of those full vials all at once. That's how safe it is. The only thing that's going to do is it may create a slight drop in blood pressure because that's a massive dose, exponentially more than anything that a normal person would take, but it's still safe. You can't do that with Tylenol. You'll die, right? So BPC is basically body protection compound. It's a 15 amino acid peptide that's found in the gut. It helps the gut lining heal from all the nasty acids in the stomach, and it basically creates new blood vessels, angiogenesis that's called. It has a bunch of other effects that I'm going to make a separate video if you want to know the detail, but for the purposes of a starter stack, just know that that is mainly for healing and recovery through the formation of new blood vessels. TB500, so the thymus gland is this gland in your chest. When you're a kid, it's really big, pumps out a lot of immune cells. By the time you're 30, it becomes pretty inactive. And there's a hormone called thymosin beta 4. It's a big 43 amino acid. I said hormone. It's a big 43 amino acid peptide. And TB500 is the section of thymosin beta 4 that binds actin. What is actin? Actin is literally the rebar of the body. Okay, so this is what forms like cellular cytoskeleton. You know what cytoskeleton is? Just think about that, cytoskeleton. So it just forms the framework. So TB500 is very good at organ repair, tissue repair, and it is also a neonatal gene activator. And that's very cool. It's the only peptide that activates neonatal genes. That's why those two work really well in conjunction, because they don't do the same thing, but they are very synergistic when it comes to healing. KPV, you don't hear about this one very often. This is the strongest anti-inflammatory peptide. It's 3 amino acids, KPV, and it's strong strong anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, antifungal. So when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I have this nagging knee thing, this shoulder thing, it's BPC, TB, KPV, and if it's an acute injury, then you throw growth hormone in there, and the healing properties of that cocktail are amazing. Let's just review really quickly because I feel like I'm talking 100 miles an hour. So retatrutide definitely would be the base of a hypothetical starter stack. Starting at 0.5 milligrams, stepping up to 4 milligrams if you really want to lose weight, stopping at around 1.5 to 2 for just normal homeostasis. And then we talked about either tesamorelin with ipamorelin or CJC with ipamorelin for people below 45 to promote your growth hormone 5 nights a week before you go to sleep on a 90-minute fast. Then growth hormone itself, 2 to 3 IUs a night, 5 nights a week for people 45 and over. And then we talked about, the BPC, TB, KPV. Those would be, those you could take different ways. I take them 5 days a week at very, very small doses. You really don't, I read a lot of people taking like these massive doses. I don't know where they're getting these protocols from. I feel like they're getting them from people who are trying to sell lots of peptides. I don't know. I try to suggest protocols that work, and there's no need to waste money. So, and then we talked about, 5-amino-1-MQ and SS31 for unhealthy people, and then moving on to MOTS, SLOOP, and NAD. So from that, I hope you can gather enough information to sort of design a starter stack. There is another amazing peptide called epitalon. I'll be doing like a separate video about that, but epitalon is something that everyone should be doing for about 10 to 20 days every quarter. And this is truly the anti-aging peptide because it literally makes your DNA starts out at a certain health. And as you get older, the end of the strand, what's called the 3' end of your DNA strand, starts to cleave and get shorter and shorter. That's called the telomere. It's kind of like the plastic thing on the end of your shoelace, basically. And eventually, this impedes DNA replication, and it can lead to cancer and other problems, and it can lead to senescent cells or zombie cells that don't work anymore. So epitalon basically tells telomerase, right? I said telomere. It tells telomerase to rebuild that broken, shortened end. It also acts on the pineal gland, which is a small gland in the brain that basically controls a multitude of biological functions that I do not want to get into because I can see that I'm getting near half an hour. So, but epitalon every quarter, amazing, amazing compound. So I would, start with that from the jump also. I hope you found this informative, and, I'm glad that now when I meet somebody, I can just send them this YouTube link. But I really hope you found this helpful, and there'll be more to come. But I don't know if I spoke too fast, but hopefully you have enough information that you can, sit down and feel comfortable designing your starter stack. If you have any questions, please ask. I'm always here to help. Thanks.